is going to be talking about the people whose names are on the windows and how he has a connection with those people. All of us, many of us have connections with those people. But we're going to listen to Hoyt's musings, and he's hoping he can finish it within the Sunday school time period. So let's do our best to not interject. Does that make sense? And then if we have time at the end, maybe we can interject something. But what you've got is not a bulletin. It's a handout about the windows to have, to just kind of have as a remembrance and to use along. Okay?
And,
so Hoyt, turn it over to Hoyt.
and we encourage you sometime to read the scriptures. We're not going to have time in the worship service to read the total scriptures that go with each window. So keep that with you, and sometime when you're not doing anything, there's something you can do. I'm going to start with the windows in the gathering area. There are 3 of them there, and I'm going to go from right to left on those. And the first one is Doug and Bessie Kirby and Kevin that gave the window. Doug was an elder in the congregation, a rather quiet individual. Bessie was the one that really made up the difference between the quietness. And if you ever talk with Bessie, you're going to talk a while. You can ask Mary Jo about that. I was born in Doug's grandparents' home on Stone Mountain Street in Lawrenceville. Okay, so that's how far back that I have known the Kirby family. Now I don't remember those days, but that's where it started. My family, it was during World War II, and my family was renting rooms from them at the time. I have pictures of me being held by my parents outside the house, my mother in one and my father in the other. And I don't have, if you are interested in something like that, I don't have one for everybody, but if you want to sort of pass these around, scatter them around somewhere, these pictures will fit in as we go around the room. My sister once told me we were one of the first families that had the TV set on Stone Mountain Street, and Doug would come over to the house and watch TV with us. I don't remember that either, but he did. In 6 years later, my family bought a house 3 doors up from the Kirby home on Stone Mountain, and that's the street, and that's where I grew up. The middle window in the back. Now these are have the children coming to Jesus, and also in the middle is the Good Shepherd, and then Jesus knocking at the door is the pictures in them. And you have to look at the door on the windows, or on that window, and there's no knob on the outside for Jesus to come in. You have to open the door and invite him in. Ralph, Elizabeth, McElhannon, Matt, and Meredith gave the middle window in memory of the building committee. And she was our board chair during that time. So the board chair serves 2 years, and she ended up, we extended all the members a year just to make the transition into the new building, hopefully a little easier. And so she served 3 years at that time. The story about the family, they live on New Hope Road, and we're remodeling the home. They put a second floor on the house and still lived in the house while they were doing that. They're very versatile. And I'm going to do, there is one window in the gathering area that is given by the children, W.O. and Doris Thompson, given by Andrea, Marilyn, Sanford, and Kim. Also, W.O. and Doris and W.O.'s sister, Vernell Wages, Lamar and Vernell Wages, and their 2 children, Bill and Sylvia, gave the round window. Now, you'll get more information about that during our worship service. It was the only window that was really going to be used in the building at the time as we were moving in. Doris, you always want to have Doris as your teacher or craft teacher in Vacation Bible School. She always had great crafts. So she also worked at, in the, Lamar Wages was the county tax commissioner for Gwinnett County, and she worked in the tax office for a number of years with him. W.O. worked at the post office. He delivered my family's mail on Stone Mountain Street. Remember the bags, load of the bags and the mail in it, and they'd walk the routes. The mailbox was up on the porch somewhere, so they had to go up to every house and around, so they got their exercise in. W.O. was also very creative in building things. I know there's holders for brass flower pots that are in the workroom. Also, cabinets you see in the fellowship hall that were given were built by W.O. for the choir to hold their robes and hold their music, and that's where they go and get their music, and when they go to the choir through the fellowship hall before worship each week. Vernell, Lamar's wife, played or W.O.'s sister, played the organ for us at times. Ironically, their daughter Sylvia, I think Bill became the county agent for Spalding County, which is Griffin, and then the family sort of migrated that way, and Sylvia became the county commissioner, or the tax commissioner for Spalding County. So her father had been here, was a tax commissioner, and she is there. I was thinking she had retired, but I'm told that she is still active and doing that. Bill was a year ahead of me in school, so I knew him. I see him in school quite often. These two families were a major part of our, in those years. Bill, I'm sorry, not Bill, but the family had a number of people that sang in the choir. W.O. and Doris's children gave the gathering area window, and I have all kinds of stories. Most of them I can't tell about this family because I've known them so long. Andrea was organist for many years. Andrea and I, in 1963, I was working at Peachtree Christian Church for the summer in a program that they had, and part of the activities we do at that time was working at a camp, and I was assigned to the Cairo camp at Unicoi State Park. This is before Camp Christian. And Andrea and I were co-counselors in 1963, summer of 63. Marilyn and I spent a lot of times at Camp Christian with her youngest daughter, which is also her oldest daughter actually, and my youngest son. We spent a number of years of them growing up in Camp Christian. Sanford is like his father, always doing something around the church. He built the front for the baptistry here to match the sanctuary. As you enter the door, near the offices, there's a cross on the wall, and you may not look at it as you come in, but that cross used to be on the back wall of the choir loft in the old church on Perry Street. So I'm not sure when he built it, but it came with us and was placed there once we got in the building. So the table in the conference room, he also created that. He found the tabletop and refinished it. Had no legs to it, and he made the legs that go to it. And we've sat around it for years now. This window over here has Manny Mae and Carl Harrington on it. They had three sons, Larry, Bobby, and Morris. Carl was one of four members of the church that worked at the post office. He served as our church treasurer for probably 40 years at least. his son inherited the job from him, so together they were our church treasurer for, I think it was a little over 50 years. It was the type of thing, giving is private, and so you didn't change. You just kept someone who knew what the giving was. Bobby, their second son, was in high school with me, not classmates, but a year or two ahead. Maddie Mae was a member of Tonto. She was one that could tell you rather openly, being a part of Tonto, of what her aches and pains were, like several of the ladies I learned because I spent a lot of time with them. I was asking the Tonto group to donate some money to get a new communion set a number of years back. This is when we were still in the Rock Church on Perry Street. And as I was telling what we were doing, we had a brass set. If you ever, brass is heavy, and it's hard to keep clean also, and passing these around with the trays and so forth. And all of a sudden, Maddie Mae spoke up, I'll give it in memory of Carl, her husband. And that's the communion set that we still use each Sunday. R.E. and Whitlock and family, C.M. Haney family, Mr. and Ms. Thomas F. Wages. These people, R.E. and Mildred Whitlock, were husband and wife. They had two children, Eddie and James. Lois Haney, I never knew her husband. He had passed away before I moved back. Lois Haney was Mildred's sister. So the two sisters gave the window in memory of each other's family and their birth family, I guess you would call it. The Whitlocks lived on Pike Street near Langley Drive, just sort of past it. Next door to them was Jones Dairy, and there were cows. I mean, it was a dairy. They milked the cows there and so forth. Now, there's one picture that I was passing around of my dad milking a cow. I think that was probably out on Duluth Highway on the farm, but that's basically what it was. I remember going to the dairy there and being back in the fields with the cows. Every day there were 2 quarts of milk on our porch. Victor and Winnell Wynn. Victor was killed in a car accident on their way to Florida for a vacation a number of years ago. My father worked in Atlanta at a shoe factory, General Shoe Company, which became Genesco as it went on became on the stock market. Winnell worked in the same area. I think it was Atlanta Gas Light was the name back then. And she was one of my father's riders back in the 1950s when I was growing up. Winnell also ran a restaurant. Does anybody know what the restaurant's name was? Windmill. The Windmill on Pike Street. The best fried chicken in town. And I think it was probably the first carry-out, I guess, too, that they had a little eating place, but it wasn't a restaurant. Brother Shadwick is Evelyn Carlisle. They have a window back here. Was Evelyn's brother. He called Doug his brother, although he's his brother-in-law. Brother had a Cocker Spaniel that had puppies, and Brother had some physical disabilities because of some illness when he was very young as a child. When the dog had puppies, he didn't want to keep the mother dog. He kept 1 or 2 of the puppies rather than the mother dog. Wouldn't have anything to do with her. Happy was the name of the dog, and it's the Cocker Spaniel that's in the picture. It ended up with our family. There's a picture of Happy jumping up on my leg, and me and my younger sister Donna, and Smokey sitting in front of us, who was a lab. Happy and I had the same nickname. I was called Brother, also because he had one sister. I have three, or had three. One older one's passed away. In May of 1964, I was 21. I was was licensed by the Region of Georgia at the Rock Church on a Sunday evening, and Sam McCook at the time, who was the minister, told the congregation gathered that evening that I should now be called Hoyt. My sisters and the church, everybody knew me as brother in those days, and it was rather difficult for some, especially my sisters, to start calling me brother. The transom window, Jim and Susan Wilhelm, Andrew and Stephanie were their children. They were transferred here by the IRS, and Daniel had Down syndrome, and he passed away at a very young age because of that illness. I'm not sure even if Andrew and Stephanie really knew their brother Daniel, or they would have been very young if they did. They were very active in the congregation. They were pleased that they could give the window in memory of Daniel and be a memorial for him. They were transferred back to Pennsylvania, and they visited a time or two, and as far as I know, are still there. March 21st each year, just something to think about, is Down Syndrome Day. The date symbolizes the 3 copies of the 21st, see 321, 3 copies of the 21st chromosome, which causes Down syndrome. And their motto is more alike than different. And we have had a couple of children in the church that had Down syndrome. Back here is John and Louise Kraft. Was given in by them in memory of the family. Patsy, Becky, David, and Lucy, their children I grew up with. They're one of along with the Thompsons and a lot of families we've had over the years have had and still do a strong music program, and a lot of people have been involved in it. John was one of my Sunday school teachers. He was one of 4 members that worked at the post office. John and W.O. Thompson, Carl Harrington from up here, and Herman Fowler. There's no window for the Fowler family, but he was a member that worked at the post office. The summer after high school, my wife had started as a student at Georgia Baptist Hospital School of Nursing, and we agreed to be separated. I was going to be in Athens and her in Atlanta, that we would write one another. And we added on to that every day. And so we almost made it. But one letter I'd sent her that summer, and it's on the picture. It has a 10 down in the corner, so it's the 10th letter. I put Lawrenceville rather than Atlanta. And the person who was getting the mail out of the box in front of the post office called it. He would get the mail out and post it each evening. And he showed John that the street, and his father was a classmate of mine, so he knew I'd made the mistake. And they marked through Lawrenceville, wrote Atlanta, and Betty got it the next day. So it's who you know. John had told me about the mistake the following Sunday. My first day of college, my family took me to Athens and dropped me off at the Christian College dorm, and it was doing orientation some that day and so forth. Patsy, their daughter, had come over for the day. She was starting her second year at Georgia, and her boyfriend was going to bring her back home because I think she was still working. I think she worked at Saul's, which was a store downtown back in those days. And they asked me to ride with them, come to Lawrenceville with them, so the boyfriend wouldn't have to ride back by himself. So about 11:30 the Sunday evening after my parents had dropped me off in Athens, I was back in Lawrenceville, afraid to call them and tell them where I was. Virgil and Reba Thompson is back here. Virgil was in the military in World War II, if I remember this right, and while he was away, his mother transferred her and his membership to First Christian Church, and he didn't know that until he got back home and found out he was a member of another church. And he became a deacon and elder over the years. Reba and Virgil had the first wedding in the Rock Church on Perry Street. And Reba worked for the Salvation Army. I was working with Lawrenceville Ministers Association, and we spent time getting funds from the churches and ministers and letting her disperse it along with the Salvation Army. On July 19th, 1970, and I didn't know this, Lee told me this a few years ago, Lee was baptized on Sunday morning at the Rock Church, and at 7:30 that evening was my service of ordination to the Christian ministry. And behind Doug and the Doug Carlisle family, Sheila and Ed were their children. Doug worked at Kraft Foods. After the Olympics, Kraft Foods had closed, and they were storing supplies for the Olympics. So he got tables and chairs for us that we used in the fellowship hall for several years. They were leftovers from the Olympics. Evelyn worked at First National Bank in Lawrenceville. My boss next door, Clarence Mumford, Mumford Drug Company, which is McCrae's, I want to say, yeah, McCrae's Bar and Tavern. It was a drugstore once upon a time. And Clarence was a supporter of Georgia, went over talking to Evelyn one day, gave her a membership card for the Georgia Touchdown Club, and she filled it out, and Doug and Evelyn became supporters of the University of Georgia, had season tickets for years. These windows were really intentionally left open because we have had some events that required chairs in the gathering area because of overflow and the number of people in the building. Mr. and Ms. W.L. Oakes is the window back here, and Patricia and Buck are their children. I invited, Jeanette was my Sunday school teacher, or was a youth teacher for several at that time, and she was having a cookout for us at her house on the corner of Jackson and Croghan Street in Lawrenceville. I invited a young lady to go with me on a first date in the spring of probably 1958, I think it was. Eventually that lady became my wife. And we spent a lot of years together. Jeanette was active later in Tonto. The family was very close there. Of course, the children Patricia and Buck are still active in the church. Is living up at the lake and doesn't come as often quite as Patricia. There are four people that are still involved in the church that made their confession of faith and baptism in the 1950s. These are the earliest. Remember, last year we had three individuals that passed away that joined in the 40s. In July of 1956, Patricia Oakes made her confession of faith and was baptized. She is the oldest member in time of the church now, not in age, but in the church. We have some 90-year-olds in the church. We won't tell those names. Buck and July of 1958, Buck Oaks and Marilyn Thompson Parks made their confession of faith and joined the church. And then in October, I'm the odd one out of this, not being July, we always had revivals in July, and you joined the church during the revival. But the fourth one is me, October 1959. I just kept waiting. I was shy. I didn't want to be in front of people and all that sort of thing. And so I kept putting it off. And then 2 years later, going away to college to study for ministry. WL was a good friend. He worked in some service stations in town. He had a great sense of humor. And he would tell stories, and he would put his family in those stories. And there was one that he would quote Jeanette of what she was saying. And one day he said, Jeanette said, "Without my money, you would not have this house." And she said, "Without my money, you wouldn't have that boat out there to go fishing." And that's the reason Buck has inherited that. He lives on the lake and fishes a lot. "Without my money, you wouldn't have that car sitting out there." And WL said, "Without your money, I wouldn't have you." So that was WL. This is JB and Montine Satterfield and their son Grant. JB and I were the only two Timothys, two members that went into the ministry over the years for a number of years, way back then. He served a number of congregations around the Lawrenceville area. Montine, his wife, was a pink lady at the hospital for a number of years. She too was an original member of Tonto. She was she was our oldest member at that time, very unique lady. The major problem for Montine was that she lived near Mary Jo Alvord, and they became good friends. And you'll have to talk with Mary Jo about the antics that those two have and things they were involved with. Mr. and Ms. Francis M. Frank and Belle Rowden. Jay and Joe Rowden were members, that's JW's parents. It is also Agnes Donnan. She was part of giving this window also. Agnes and JW were brother and sister. So two families here. My wife lived next door to the Rowdens when they lived on Grayson Highway when she was very young. It's been years back that they were there. I was in school with Brenda, their oldest daughter, a family that was active in the congregation as the children were growing up. Agnes was, as I said, JW's sister. Tom and Agnes Donnan. I met them that summer of 1963 at Peachtree when I was in their summer program. Tom was a board member, and Agnes always came to the board meetings with Tom so she wouldn't be at home by herself. They did not have any children. And so it was when I first met her. After Tom's death, she moved back here to Lawrenceville and joined First Christian Church. She always kept Tom's hat when she was here in Lawrenceville. She had a front door, and then there was a door on the front to the side that you could see in, and a window next to it. And she kept Tom's hat on a lamp table inside that window so it could be seen, thinking that people would, well, there's probably a husband here or somebody. And so that hat was always laying there. She was a member of Tonto. She woke up about 2 o'clock in the morning, she told me one time, and there was a squirrel had run across her bed, across her stomach, and had gnawed into an area on the roof and gotten into a closet and gotten into the house, is the way it went. Happy Easter and Valentine Easter were husband and wife. Well, that answers a lot of things for some people. Happy's real name was Martin. I remember going to the hospital to see him in St. Joseph's in Atlanta, and I almost started to say Happy Easter and changed it to Martin Easter. And the lady at the desk asked me, I've had people asking about a Happy Easter, and I explained to her what was going on. Happy told me after he gave the windows, he wished he could be here and hear people ask about what is Valentine Easter. And I have had people ask, and I think some others have had that also, ask about that. They moved from Birmingham, Alabama. Happy was very active. He was in later years was in a electric cart, and you had to watch your toes when you were standing around because sometimes he would run over a toe or two. He worked in the steel mills in Birmingham, Alabama, before they moved here, and he developed lung cancer in his later years. And remember those lawsuits? You'd see advertisements on TV and so forth about filling out information and might get a payout from the asbestos on that. And he received a rather large check. He told me how much it was, rather large. He called me one day and wanted me to come by, and we visited a little bit. He had handed me a check, and I glanced at it, and I was thanking him for it, and we were talking about some other things, and I looked at it a second time as I was getting ready to leave, and rather than for $2,500, it was $25,000 that he was giving to the church, and it was put to good use. Up here is Jack Poole. They lived off of Webgen House near my father and stepmother, B. The two families were close, being involved in church. After my father passed away, Clyde and Fanny kept an eye on B and helped her at times. Early on, when I came to, in August of 1990, is when I became minister of First Christian Church of Lawrenceville, and Fanny became seriously ill and was in the hospital for quite a while. I'm not even sure how long it was. She even got into a coma, was not expected to live. And during the time in the hospital and in that coma, their son Jack passed away. And their sister Glenda and her husband called me one evening and were telling me and asked me to meet them and to go tell Clyde was at home, Fanny was in the hospital, and to go tell Clyde what had happened. And I met, now this is some changes from years ago, I met their daughter and her husband at McDonald's, which is now a car wash at Sugarloaf Parkway, which was then Johnson Road and Scenic Highway at 8:30 one evening to go tell Clyde that Jack had passed away. And it was interesting, Fanny ended up outliving even Clyde. He passed away first. G. and Odell Harrington, or this window here, and they were sort of a kind, gentle, quiet people. They loved being in church. Said they missed a lot. Their week just wasn't quite right unless they were in church on Sunday. And JT worked at General Motors in Atlanta, which a number of people did. Some of our other members, Doug and Virgil, I know, worked at part of the company off of 285. He would come home, he had a farm on Lawrenceville-Swanee Road, would come home and plow. He always had a garden, for sure, like most everybody in church back in those days. And but he had some fields, he would plant corn and in those fields. And so he said sometimes he was plowing at 10 o'clock at night. Odell was a child as a youth. She was driving on the farm when she was rather young, and she was going across a ditch on a little bridge, and she ran off the bridge into the ditch. and she never drove again the rest of her life. Their son lived next door to them. JT's and Odell's son, if you face, were on the left. JT's brother was on the right of them on Lawrenceville Swanee. And the son, I'm losing my mind here, the son retired and moved to Hayesville, North Carolina. And JT was really upset with him that he had left and gone that far away. But the son and his wife came back one day a week, every week, to see them and check on them while they were still living. They even took, after JT passed away, they took Odell up to spend a week to see if she wanted to, would come and live with them and not be so far away. And the idea was to stay a week. She made it about 2 days, and they had to bring her back. Didn't want to stay up there. Finally, we're getting there. Betty and Odie Walker Jr. family, Mr. and Ms. E.B. Wilson family. Betty Walker was a member of the church. She spent most of her life in Missouri and came here. She had 2 sons, and both ended up in this area. She was an original member of Tonto also. Many of these were part of the Tonto group. Her son Ed and his family were also members and very active in the church. Ed sang in the choir. Ed was also our treasurer when we moved into the building, and he's the one that actually set up or worked on the loan for our church building in those days. Her other son, Betty's other son, was a manager of an assisted living facility, and eventually Betty ended up there when her health was falling. Okay, any quick questions? What time are we? Good. Uh-oh. No.
How did they choose the subject of the window?
You will get that in the worship service. You will. I'm going to do it. No, it's not out of turn, because I should have clarified some of that, because I've got a presentation I've got to make of how the windows came to be, because they weren't planned in the original building.
Is there any information about the big window back there?
You will get that in the worship service.
And it's on the handout.
And it's on the back of your handout too, yeah, that's true.
Isn't it amazing all the connections Boyd has with every single individual? He and I have been talking about this for a little while now, and it just is overwhelming, the amount of connections in that. Boyd is a major treasure to our church.
He is our biggest treasure.
I might mention the pictures too were my mother and me as a baby, and my father and me as a baby, me as I was growing up, which I'm about 2 years old, and I'm walking up a hill in back of our house on Pike Street. We're living there, and it had been burned off, so it was black. And when I was coming back, that's the reason I had black dust all over me, and I had followed my sister somewhere. I don't remember that part. Then there is the envelope that has the marked out Lawrenceville. I was afraid to bring the letter. I mean, the letter is still in the envelope. I was afraid to bring that as a show and tell, because I figured you want to read it, and I'm not sure we need to do that. Then there's one of my dad milking a cow, which I'm not sure is at the Jones. I've been to the Jones Dairy years ago on Pike Street. We had 8 families of the church that lived on Pike Street back in the 1950s. And that's from the courthouse to the bridge over the railroad. And one family lived next to the railroad, and one of the, let's see, I guess it was a grandson, told me one time that they had a rope tied to a tree that they would swing out over the railroad tracks on that rope, and I mean, it's really a drop where they lived. All kinds of stories. But that's all I have, unless you.
Boy, I've got this little memory.
Uh-oh.
It's just kind of an unusual thing. I don't know. I remember walking home from elementary school, the whole deal.
I did too.
Small. I don't know what age I was, but back then I think the kids had what we call book satchels or something. You carry books in. And I remember
I didn't, but
walking down Pike Street and headed home. And on the other side of the street, over around by the Crafts house, you were walking on the other side of the sidewalk, and you had like 4 or 5 books just in your walking like this with nothing. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, I didn't have the book say.
You know, it's like, oh, he's in high school. He's a lot older than me. He's in high school.
No, and at that time I wouldn't be. In fact, we were living, I'm not sure how long we even lived there. It's the earliest memories I have of a house on Pike Street. And when I was first grade, around Thanksgiving, I was walking home on your side of the street going home, and a neighbor lady a couple of houses up said, "You know what your parents did today?" And I had no, they bought a house on Stone Mountain Street. So by Christmas, I was on Stone Mountain Street.